posted shortly after the luncheon. And with that, I think I'll introduce the speaker here. So our topic today is ethics for engineers, practical applications of ethical theory related to engineering and engineers. Dean Ringle is our speaker today. Dean is the Executive Director of the County Engineers Association of Ohio and a member of the Board of Registration for Professional Engineers and Surveyors. Prior to joining CEAO, he worked at the Franklin County Engineers Office for more than 36 years, with the last 17 serving as the Franklin County Engineer. He serves on the boards of the State Registration of Professional Engineers and Surveyors, the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying, and the OSU Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering Advisory Board. With that, Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you for the presentation.
Okay, Patrick, thank you very much. And thank you to you and John Sternberg for getting this set up. Boy, we talked about this quite a while ago and weren't sure if it was going to be in-person or virtual. And obviously it's virtual now. Hopefully we won't be forever virtual. I do enjoy interaction with the audience, and I think that it's always a little bit better to be able to, you know, interact, ask questions, and see how that goes. So we'll do what we can today, and as we have with other virtual meetings, and I'm sure it'll be just fine. But I do look forward to the future of meeting in person again. So I do serve as the Executive Director for the County Engineers Association, and that's my day job, I guess. But one of the things that I've enjoyed doing, enjoying serving the profession, is being a member of the Board of Registration in Ohio. And all of my talk today is on that. So I think I wanted to be able to, you know, share some things on there, because we see a lot of things ethic-wise coming through the board, and I think it'd be good to share that with engineers and surveyors, so they kind of know what things are happening with the board, and maybe how things are happening, and maybe some things to avoid, or so they don't have to deal with that. So, you know, with that, we were coming up, John and I were talking about what kind of a talk do we want to title this, and you know, we call it Ethics for Engineers. See if we get the slides working here. So one of the things was, you know, what are ethics for engineers? It sounds like more specifically, you know, how to make sure that what you are preparing is quality work, it's safe work, it's protecting the public, and of course that's why, you know, we have our licensing boards is for regulating the individuals. It's a protection of the public is a key part. So let's see. I'm going to stop just for a second because our slides are not advancing here. There we go. All right, now I think we're advancing. So that was one of the titles. The other is engineering ethics in general. Engineering ethics is maybe, you know, this is the failure of, I guess sometimes we don't think about the engineering ethics of things until there's a failure. We design things, hopefully with a level factor of safety that keeps us from having catastrophic failures. But some of the problems with engineering is that with that safety factor built in, when it does fail, it's a pretty massive failure because it's already exceeded all the safety limits. So we could talk about that. Ethics for engineers itself, and you could actually say, you know, what we have in the code, the Ohio Revised Code, the Ohio Administrative Code, those are the ethics we're supposed to be following. But in general, if you tie all that together, I think the whole point is ethics is ethics. We can't just separate them out. How we act in our personal life is kind of how we were acting in our professional life. And so I think ethics itself is something that we have to deal with and do deal with on a daily basis, both personal and professionally. So one of the things I wanted to share was out of the revised code, Ohio Revised Code, section 4733.151. And that is strictly kind of getting us on the viewpoint of why are we taking all these ethics courses and why we have presenters present. So it's a good reminder that where we used to be a one-year cycle of having continuing professional development hours every year, and we have to renew our license every year. 4 years ago, we switched over to actually a few more years ago than that. We switched over to a biennial, so it's every 2 years renewal. I kind of like every year because it was nice to remember that I have to renew the dog license and I have to get my license renewed at the same time. Now he's still every year, but I get to do it every 2 years. But in that, we have the requirement of continuing professional development hours that need to be taken to be able to renew our license. Because it's every 2 years, the law was rewritten and it says that you need to have 30 hours every 2 years. In my mind, I'm still doing the 15 a year, even though it doesn't need to be. It's 30 for the 2 years, and I just package it together in 2-year increments. But in that 30 hours that we're supposed to take, what it says in the code that's on the screen is that at least 2 of the 30 hours need to be on professional ethics or rules relevant to the practice of engineering or surveying. And so that tells you it's 1 a year. On the average, it's 2 every 2 years. So just as you're keeping track, and since 2021, at the end of 2021, this is our year that we're going to have to do our renewal. This is the time to kind of start adding up. Do I have the hours that I need? Hopefully you guys have had plenty of hours and plenty of opportunity that right now you should be working on your carryover, since you're allowed to carry over 15 years, or 15 years, that's 15 hours in the next year. And you can carry it as this screen says, section E2 says, you can forward up to 2 hours on professional ethics. If you've already met the first 2 that you needed for your cycle, you can add to it. So hopefully you're in the cycle of being able to add hours into for next year and into the next 2-year cycle. So I like this picture. You know, if you know surveyors or are a surveyor, you know that that our famous Mount Rushmore picture has 3 presidents that were surveyors and one that wasn't. So sometimes the second terminology is 3 surveyors and 1 other guy. But that other guy, Theodore Roosevelt, has some good quotes, and the one I like to share here is just the whole idea of, you know, the need to educate a person in morals in addition to just the mind. Because if you don't have the morals in there, then as he says, you know, just education, you're a menace to society. So something to think about and why we really need to keep that into our repertoire. The other quote, just to add in here, C.S. Lewis said, most people don't need to be taught, they just need to be reminded. And that reminds me of when growing up and the one phrase that says, everything I learned, I need to know, I learned in kindergarten. And so the rest of our lives, we're just trying to remember that. Just to be reminded of what those important things were on treating people nice, sharing, no hitting, all those sort of things. So as far as what we have to deal with as engineers, there are basically 3 bodies that have enforcement of ethics or conduct for our profession and for other professions. In those 3 branches, you obviously have the judicial or court system. Those are the ones that, you know, as it goes to court, those have to be looked at and level of proof offered, but that's a whole system in itself. You also have the Ohio Ethics Commission, which has been set up to specifically look at ethical issues that we have to deal with. And then the third are all the various state licensing boards that are in existence, and some of them, like the Engineers and Surveyors Board, has our own ethics section that we have to follow. And so, you know, some of the things that come up to the state board or licensing board are issues that also involve either the judicial system or the ethics commission. And so I think these three bodies work well together. A lot of times what we will do is if something else is before one of the other two bodies, especially in the court system, we usually don't want to jump the gun and do all of our investigation if it's still going through the court system. So we will allow that to play out if there happens to be a court case. And even if it's before the ethics commission, they have a lot more things to look at in terms of ethics, and we usually wait for if there's a decision that has to come from them, and then it becomes a part of what's presented to us on the state licensing board. So that's kind of how the three work together. Although we get a lot of complaints and inquiries that come directly to our board, and that's okay, and we investigate that and then figure out, you know, where we need to go with that. So for the code of ethics for our licensing board in Ohio, we have what's called the Ohio Administrative Code, which, as you know, we have a revised code and an administrative code. And the revised code are the ones set in statute by the state legislative bodies and then signed into law by the governor. But then we also have an administrative code, which is set up and approved by that body that says that we have to have certain administrative procedures, some of the details of the rules in the administrative code. So as an example, in the revised code, it says you shall have a code of ethics. And then the administrative code is one that actually has the details of the code of ethics. The nice thing is for engineers and surveyors, 4733 is the same chapter, whether it's an administrative or revised. And if you start looking in one and find it's not there, you just go to the other code and type the same numbers in, you hopefully find them. But what's the key as we're going through this? Our responsibilities as professional engineers, professional surveyors, is that we are to know and understand the laws and rules. You know, it's been said many times in court that ignorance of the law is no excuse, and the court does expect us to know what these rules and responsibilities are. And there's been other sessions, other seminars, other talks that you've had that go through a lot of the details. So I'm going to touch on a few, not the complete list, but you know, the idea is to know where to look and that you can always look something up. And that both the Ethics Commission and the Ohio State Board of Registration are resources for you. And you're allowed to call and ask and email and ask questions of both those bodies. And I'll say that throughout this talk because it's pretty impressive that we have two bodies that are willing to help share that information and not just say, oh, well, you got to wait till you do something wrong and then we talk to you. That's not the point. So one of the things in the Administrative Code 4733-35 it talks about integrity, and it basically says that, you know, we as professional license holders, we're obligated to act with complete integrity in all the professional matters that we have, dealing with both the client, our employer. Sometimes that's you want it to be you know, all good, but sometimes there's a conflict, and you have to kind of work through that. It says we have to be honest and impartial and serve the public, client, and employer with devotion. So devotion is a pretty strong word. You know, that means you're totally serving the public, you're totally serving the client, you're totally serving your employer. And sometimes those are in conflict, and you have to kind of work out what is going to be the best for each of those entities. And so, you know, sometimes there's examples where you can find out that maybe the employer is asking something that isn't the best interest of the client, or maybe the client's asking something that just goes against the integrity of both your employer and you, and you have to work that out. Or you see something that is going to happen that's going to harm the public, and hopefully, you know, you can look at that before it happens and say, yeah, well, I don't think we should do that because it might harm the public. So I think those are the three areas that it's good to look at. It's good to reflect on, and it's good to make sure that as you're going through your professional, you know, work, that you address those and say, are we good? Is this working for all three areas? The responsibility we have as engineers and surveyors is, number one, to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. That's the utmost. That's why we have licenses, and that's why we have licensing board. If you find that there's something that's going to happen that isn't going to be in the best interest of the public, then you have the option to either sever the relationship with the employer or the client if that's needed. I had a friend that was a pretty good surveyor in another state, and he basically was working for this one company that they asked him to basically fudge the data a little bit. In the long run, he was taking cross sections, and they asked him to up the cross sections in this one particular month, and they said, you know, the next month it'll be okay because it'll even out, it'll come back to the correct answer, but they just needed to have a little bit better cash flow that 1 month. He thought about it and went home. He said, you know what, I can't do that. He told his boss that he can't do that. That would be, even though if it was a wash in 2 months, for 1 month, the client is paid for what they didn't have. And the employer was pretty insistent on it. And he ended up quitting the job right then and there. And, you know, it's one of those, I always tell people, you know, it's okay to quit a job. Try to have one in your back pocket before you quit. But in this case, his integrity was, I can't do this, and it's not right. And he ended up quitting. So, and did get another job, so it was all good. But that was one of those tough decisions that he had to make. An ethical decision that felt in the best interest of the client was needed to do. They also need to refuse to accept responsibility for design or reports or statements that you didn't have any action in. So you're responsible for the work that you do. You're also responsible for only signing for the work that you do, and not if the people are not under your direction. If it's another engineer or surveyor or somebody, some general public that wants you to sign for work done that you didn't have responsibility over, you need to refuse to do that. If there are certain cases that come up that you think are a situation that needs to be addressed more than just you and maybe more than your employer can handle, then you need to contact the board. Let the board do an investigation. We have a lot of investigations that really, you know, don't amount to anything. So just because somebody's being investigated, don't think automatically that there's guilt there, or that there's going to be a fine, or there's going to be a penalty. Because a lot of times there's some misunderstandings, things get worked out, and cases are closed, and really nothing happens. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But the idea is that sometimes you just need to have somebody else look at it and say, is this proper? Is this what we need to do? Some of the other things is making sure that when you agree to take on an assignment, that you and your staff that's supporting you are capable of working in that area. You're qualified either by additional training, by your education. It's not to say that the only things you learn is all that you can. Oh, we got somebody that needs to be muted, so please mute. But you know, so you might have some education early on, but there's always that continuing education. And I think the best example is, you know, even in the surveying side or the engineering side, where technology has made leaps and bounds, and you might become an expert in an area, drones, whether maybe it's some other GIS or some other areas, GPS, you know, some areas that weren't in the original education you had in school, but you were able to get that additional training and experience and become proficient. So, you know, those are the assignments that you want to be able to say, yeah, I've gotten that background. You also want to look at your statements or testimony to make sure that you're saying the facts. You're knowledgeable of the facts. You know that these are the correct facts. nothing but the facts, as they say. Engineers are pretty good at that, but every so often we start supposing, and we need to, at least if there's things that are calculated or estimated, we just need to know that those are estimates and not always absolutes. So we need to make sure that our statements are proper as we're giving this. This is another one that I just wanted to bring up, because we do have cases that come before the board where people, engineers or surveyors, have signed and sealed work that wasn't under their direction. That it basically is plan stamping of again, signing for work that wasn't within your area of understanding, whether it was work actually done or it's maybe beyond your technical competence. So part of that professionalism is making sure you're signing for what you can sign for, and not doing plan stamping. Plan stamping itself still happens, but it used to be a lot worse, and so I'm glad to see a lot of the engineers and surveyors are taking it upon themselves to make sure that they're reviewing the data, reviewing the information, and making sure that the work is under their direction. Conflicts of interest, that happens once in a while, especially if you get involved in a lot of different areas. But if you have a potential conflict that you see coming up, one of the things you have to do is disclose that to your client, to your employer, whoever the conflict may be with, and make sure they understand it. And at some point, it may be a conflict that everybody says, okay, we're okay with that, we understand it, it's good to go. And other times you may just feel more comfortable saying, because I feel personally about this conflict, I'm just going to have to step back and not be involved in it. So that's one of those calls that you've got to look at and see what kind of detail you're in, what kind of project it is. Accepting gifts from contractors or other parties that you're dealing with. Again, that's one of those things that people look at and hopefully realize, yeah, that makes some sense. The Ethics Commission, I would defer to them. They have some great write-ups on what that means. Accepting an ink pen or something de minimis isn't what they're talking about. They're talking about tickets to ball games, and well, if we ever get to go to a ball game again, but things like that, things that are pretty expensive, major meals, whatever. Those are the things that you have to look at, saying, hey, if you're dealing with the clients and the parties, somebody that could be perceived as undue influence, and so that's why you step back, make sure you don't have that perception occurring. And for public officials, if you are in the public arena and you actually review work of others, you have to make sure that you're not reviewing work that was performed by you or under your direction. That again would be a potential conflict. Even if we all think that we're good at not having that conflict, it's one that the best to stay away from and find somebody else to review it. I always thought this was interesting. Don't accept bribes. Most people, there's other terms for it, but most people would say, oh yeah, I'd never accept a bribe. But there are times that people still offer that. And you have to understand that some people aren't as honest and forthwith as our engineers and surveyors, but don't extend or don't accept anything that looks like it would be a bribe. As far as when you're seeking employment, do it based on qualifications and competence, and don't misrepresent yourself. It's like any other area. Don't embellish what doesn't need to be embellished. You just stick with the facts. What your academic record was, what your qualifications are, and you can add to it as you get more training in it. But you need to also keep in mind, this is what people are using to make a decision of whether to hire you or hire your services, and you want to make sure that you're telling the truth on all that. Improper conduct. We talked about the plan stamping. That still happens, so make sure that you stamp only what's been under your direction. Aiding and abetting illegal practice. That sounds pretty major, and it is, but sometimes people get kind of wrapped up and trapped in that, especially when somebody says, hey, I need you to help me do this, and it's okay, we're going to pay in cash, don't worry about it. Well, some of those keywords are what you want to worry about, and be careful what you're volunteering to work in and for. Protecting your seal and electronic seal, those are things that are kind of important. Your signature and seal are very important or very valuable. It's what sets you apart on a set of plans that you're taking responsibility for plans or plats or whatever drawings you have. And a lot of people are using electronic seals. You got to be careful with that because it's so easy for somebody else to just copy that electronic seal and place it on every page, and maybe you didn't sign it, but basically you sealed it. So you need to make sure that you're properly protecting your seal and signature. They do go together, but make sure that you're not letting it out to be misused by others. And one thing that I hate to say it's prevalent, but it does happen. And people that are registered in multiple jurisdictions. So you might have 3 or 4 states that you're licensed in. If you have a conviction or discipline that occurs in one state, you are required to report that in Ohio that occurred. Even if it didn't happen in Ohio or didn't supposedly affect your Ohio license, you do need to report that because all the states share in a joint enforcement website that they share information, and that does get found out. So it's easier to be able, just like anything else, just like I tell my kids, better that I hear it from you than I hear it from somebody else. And so, you know, felony convictions in another state or some other discipline, it's important that you let the board know that those occur. And especially when you renew your license, that also, at the time it says, that's one of the questions. It says, have you gotten any felony convictions or disciplines in another jurisdiction? So you need to make sure that you're being forthright with that. As with most cases, there is sometimes a penalty for things that happen that you did that were wrong, but there's even a bigger penalty when there's either a cover-up or a lying about it. And you know, one of the things, if you say you did your CPDs and you didn't, or you say you didn't have any felony convictions but you did, basically that on that application is you have lied on a government form, and that becomes another problem. So that's why you say, yeah, just don't do that, and make sure you're upfront with all that. You are required to keep records of all your business transactions, what you've done, and at some point, if there is a complaint about something, and complaint could be somebody had a complaint against you, it could be the company you work with, and you might be supportive evidence one way or the other. You have to have those records available for board inspection when they call and ask. So just keeping track of what you have. It's just other CPDs, and you have your own charts, and you keep track of all the ones you attend. You can do that. So if there's ever an investigation, boy, the easiest thing is just cooperate, be truthful, and provide all records. If those 3 things happen, most things are pretty simple and are taken care of. But we've had a couple, even recently, a couple of cases where there's a complaint, we're doing an investigation, and the engineer decides, well, I'm just going to retire. And so I don't have to give you my records if I retired. Well, that's not true. You still do, but it's kind of like putting up a roadblock to trying to get to the truth, the final answer. So the easiest thing is you do those 3 things if there happens to be an investigation going on. The process, as I mentioned, you know, if there's an investigation, somebody says, hey, it's engineer so-and-so, we think something was done improperly, or the company, you know, can you check it out? That comes to our board office. We have an investigative unit that will start looking at it. And this is something important for you guys to know, that if there is a complaint filed, the investigator knows about it, but the board does not know any names. Everything is redacted. There's So we're looking at the merits of the case, not a person or a company, and we take that situation out of decision making. So a complaint comes in, the enforcement staff looks at it, decides whether there's enough to bring to the board or to have a little bit more investigation, and determine whether, yeah, there's nothing here, or if there's a question on it, then they'll bring it to the board. The board will look at the issues, decide if they need some additional investigation, or if there's no further action, they just close it, or if there needs to be charges brought to say, now we need to discuss it in detail in a hearing setting, then that'll happen. And then the final disposition of a case is there could be a hearing if the engineer or surveyor requests a hearing. Sides are presented to a hearing officer, and then that result is brought to the board for decision. Sometimes there's a settlement where, yeah, I forgot to renew my license, and we had this many engineering or surveying projects, and so there's a settlement that it was worked out. And those vary based on the number of cases and all that, but basically there could be a settlement without a hearing and those kind of things. Again, a lot of those final decisions, if there's something that is also brought before the Ethics Commission or a court case, that may hold up a final decision until those are resolved. So I want to share a few things with you. I presented this a few weeks ago, and it's kind of interesting, but these are ethical cases that appear before the state board, and it's not things like buildings falling down, although we do have that. Right now there's a case of some improper truss design that we're looking at. But some of these are the oddities of things that come up, and you think, well, that's not engineering, or that's, you know, what does that have to do with it? But that's the issues that come before us. One of the things is we've had several cases of people stealing from their employers. Now that could be as simple as you're getting a new job and you decide that the computer you were using is a parting gift. You have to make sure that the employer agrees that that's a parting gift, or you can't take it, or the phone, or whatever. Sometimes there are things that are stolen that are physical like that. Other things, we've actually had trade secrets and cases that information that was taken without permission, and so stealing of information is something that could be construed. So you have to be careful when you're actually having a separation, that all that is clear on what you're allowed to take, not take, and so forth. Theft in office, that tends to be more in the public sector, but there's again been anything from computers to materials, things like that, of major consequence that weren't allowed to be taken. So, you know, those cases come up. Embezzlement of funds, that's been a couple cases. Interesting enough, we had one engineer that actually embezzled from a bank. We had another engineer that was in the process of a divorce and hired someone to pretend to be his wife to get the funds out in her name. And you go, wow, you know, these were engineers that were not doing engineering, but again, were really violating a code of ethics. Theft of food, that's one that kind of surprises me, and the theft of food cases all occurred before the pandemic, so we can't blame that. But there were some where people were changing the prices, engineers were changing the prices of the organic versus regular bananas, which, you know, is only what, 10 or 15 cents difference, but apparently it rose, did it enough times, it rose to quite a high number. Changing the stakes from different sticker prices. All this was caught on tape, and engineers were convicted of theft. Kind of hard to have to deal with your professional license having to be for just a few bananas. So that's things that you have to think about, and that's why I say, you know, ethics. It's not just your engineering side; it's your whole persona. Is how do you deal with these things? So, cases that do come before the board. Moral turpitude and felonies. These are sadly the higher ranking ones. Whether it's you know, some molestation cases, whether it's a conviction of felonies, from firearms to money laundering to whatever the felony may be, those affect your engineering license. And it's interesting as they go before the board, the attorneys, you know, obviously will try to defend their engineers, and their whole defense is basically saying, but it's not engineering. And that's not what the case says. Our ethics don't say it has to be just in engineering. It's do you violate a code? Do you have a felony? It's very specific that those can affect your ability to have a license or practice. So as I say here, ethics is ethics. So it's how you act and how you determine what you do in your life. Some of the things that are good buzzwords to always pay attention to. If you hear the phrase, it's just a little thing no one will notice, probably should notice that. Or it's just a little thing, it won't hurt anyone. You know, even growing up, we know that isn't always true. Or everyone else is doing it. Well, that's, as my mom said, somebody jumped off a cliff, would you all jump off the cliff too? You know, just because everybody else is doing it. So no, it's not always a good idea. Probably not in terms of if that's the argument that they're using. Or the old, hopefully so-and-so won't find out. Well, then that's a pretty clear case that you might have a conflict and you might not want to approach that. And one of my friends who's passed away, but he was a good person, good ethical person, good ethical engineer and surveyor. He always had that two-part test. He says, what if it was on the front page? And what if my mother found out? Those are the two things that he would look at and say, if I can meet those two criteria, then I'm okay. But if one of those I don't want to have, then I'm probably not going to be able to do what was being asked of me to do. When we get into the Ethics Commission, there's another set of codified laws that they deal with. And a lot of that is dealing with public officials, but it also, in those sections, deal with non-public officials. So you have state officials, local officials, and public employees. So the public employees is basically anybody that works in the public. It's not just the elected official or their top people. It's every single public employee. And it doesn't matter whether you're full-time, part-time, college student. If you are working in the public sector, you are covered by these ethics laws. And again, that includes, of course, college and universities. But there's also that last line there is very important. It says those who do business with public officials and employees. So really, if you're supplying any product at all to anybody that's working in the public, then you are covered under these ethics laws and have to pay attention to. One of the things that I'm always impressed with is how open how the Ethics Commission is. They are always out offering seminars, offering talks, sharing information, but really they are a great resource. They are open to phone calls, to emails, to inquiries. Their whole mantra is they want to keep something from happening that's bad. So if they would be able to advise you before it happened, it's much better than you call up and say, well, this happened, and then they have to say, yeah, that's a problem, because it is a problem. So they do a lot of try to do preempting in terms of some ethical issues or conflicts or whatever the question may be. And they put out a quarterly newsletter. This one, it looks in print, but obviously it can be emailed. It's called The Voice of Ethics. This happens to be the first quarter of 2021. And I was so impressed with, their outline and how they explain things. And I know that they don't have a big circulation base. It's not as much as they want. And I wish every engineer and surveyor would be on their subscription list. So I call up Susan Wilkie, who's one of the speakers, one of the main people at the Ethics Commission. I said, I really enjoyed your booklet that you put out, your pamphlet that you put out, and I said, can I copy that? Can I actually show that in a presentation I'm giving? And she was 100% enthused about it because, again, getting the word out about what they do and what's offered and what they can do to, again, help to give you the right direction before something happens. And I was impressed that Susan, she was giving a talk a few months ago, said that one of the things that's pretty important is if you ask the Ethics Commission for advice and their attorneys give you advice, you keep that advice, because that they will stand up with you if you have to go to court or any hearings if they've given you that advice. So I thought that was good advice to hear. But they do a lot of advisory opinions. There can be government entities, there can be people, there can be businesses. A lot of people can ask for an opinion, and they'll have research done and then be able to pass that advisory opinion out. You can see they've had just in 1 year a lot of, even during the COVID time, emails, telephone inquiries, written requests, all sorts coming through asking for those that advice. You can see here on this little chart that there's questions on outside business employment. They talk about the revolving door, about going back to work in an area where you had already worked, nepotism, hiring of your family, participating in public programs, all the way down through the list. You can see questions that have been asked of this past year. The different entities, cities, state, counties, villages, townships, they see the most of the public ones, but then you also have, colleges and universities and the private sector will ask questions, which is good because, as I said, the private sector is covered under some of these ethics laws that they have. The commission then also does investigations. They will have still the need, whether it's in paper or in person or virtual, to be able to do the investigations, look at cases, decide what needs to be done, and be able to still safely present those findings and decide whether there needs to be some issuing of whether there's guilt or wrongdoing, and if there needs to be some sort of correction or settlement. That's just a nice little chart showing the different amounts, the percentages of different types of entities that have asked for that information. And then their big thing that, again, I think is very proactive is their ethics education. So they have a huge training program. You can see that they said just in 1 year they've had over 10,000 attendees at their conferences, virtual, of course. They have continuing education classes. They offer webinars that people are allowed to take. And again, it's all trying to look at all the different areas of ethics that they have to deal with, and they try to answer especially the top areas of questions. They try to get some different publications out to share that. They started e-courses. So the one they have now is the Ethics Law, Building a Culture of Integrity. So you sign up and take those kind of courses. Webinars, again, are 1 hour webinars that they offer. Each year they try to put on a new one to share that information. This one is just an example, and I think you can go to their website and get the same information, but basically it's talking about when the webinars are offered. It gives you a whole calendar of events coming up, especially because they're online, they're able to do that. And also the going a little bit more in depth onto some of the ethics questions. And I've always enjoyed their presentations, whether it's a person speaking or whether it's a packaged webinar presentation. They have some good examples of and some good role playing that they use in their presentation. So enjoyable to pay attention to. And they have some regional sessions that they offer. Online resources, again, things you can download. If you just have a question on conflict of interest, they might have an entire brochure already made up that you can download and look at. That might answer your question. And if it doesn't answer questions, then you can go ahead and say, hey, I've read your conflict of interest pamphlet. Can you explain a little bit more about this particular area? And they'd be able to help you. But so much of their stuff is already prepared, investigated, prepared, and to be able to share with you. Even as simple as township trustees serving as volunteer firefighters. What's the conflict there, and what might that happen? So, looking at gifts, looking at the toolkits for public school districts, financial disclosure statements, and actually a couple courses on that. So they've also got what they call a 6-part series, so you can go through the whole cycle, especially if you're got time and still working from home or working online. You can access some of these and look at those. So with that, I wanted to share Susan Wilke's email and phone number, and the Ethics Commission address and website. Encourage you to go to that, check out the site. I just think it's fascinating what they do and what they have and what they've issued opinions on. And if you can, I'd try to get signed up and have them email you information on a regular basis, because again, cases keep coming up and they keep having decisions made. Excuse me. And then finally, I wanted to share the state board contact information. You've got the street address, you've got the phone number, you've got the email, and you've got the website, which has a lot of information on it. So I'd encourage you to be able to go ahead and go to the website, check some things out. It's kind of handy. Sometimes people, surveyors will find a capped iron pin with the surveyor's registration number in the field and don't know what that number is, and there's some ways to look that up. There's licensee lookup if you want to know whether a person's registered or not. You can look up to see if they've got a valid engineering or surveying license in Ohio. You've got looking at past cases. You can look at some of that. Just again, information on how to practice ethically, I guess, and share with that. So with that, I think we've got a few minutes left, and I just wanted to be able to open up for potential questions or I don't know if Patrick or John is going to be looking at some of those. If we have any.
Yeah. So I don't see any presentations in the chat at this point. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Dean?
This is like a hopefully non-scary time to chat about it. So.
Yes, I do. This is, I guess, a personal question or something. I obtained my Ohio PE through reciprocity. Do I still need to maintain the PE in the original state?
Oh, actually no, because each individual state licenses individually. So once, you know, if you get it by reciprocity, you still have it, because that just meant you took all the requirements needed to be licensed in Ohio. And so once you have your Ohio license, yeah, you don't have to get your other license if you say move from that state and just aren't going to practice there.
Okay, thank you very much. That was the answer I was wishing for.
We've had in the past years, for a lot of the CPD requirements of all the states, I had a couple of friends that were basically trying to get licensed in every state. And I don't know that I had anybody that ever made 50. They got 49 states. And interestingly enough, they actually had Hawaii and Alaska, and I think it was Maine and New Hampshire they didn't have. But once all the boards started requiring a lot of the CPDs, and the prices went up, it was a little harder to be licensed in that many states. But I know that a good number are licensed in 3 or 4 states. So it's pretty important to know. It costs money to keep each one going. So you have to make a decision on which ones I want to keep.
So Dean, we've had a couple come in the chat. So the first is, has the state board ever investigated ethical issues for engineers working for the federal government? And if so, how does that work?
Okay, so good question. Normally, engineers working for the federal government, there's a federal exclusion where they don't have to have a license in a particular state, because technically the federal government can work in all the different states. So the only time we would do that is if they have an Ohio license, because we are the ones that govern the Ohio licenses. That makes sense.
Okay. And then we've got another one here. Once we exit the COVID environment and return to normal, will the board go back to limiting the number of CPDs gained via webinar?
The interesting thing is we didn't really change our requirements from before COVID, pre-COVID to COVID, and we're anticipating then still not changing it after COVID because we didn't really change the requirements. What we did is help clarify the fact that if you have webinars that are doing a test or doing some sort of a quiz to make sure that you're paying attention and all that, there's no limit. There's no limit of those on what you can turn in for CPDs. If you're taking a course, whether it's a webinar or an online course that doesn't have the ability to track your time, or that you've actually spent an hour, if you said you spent an hour, if you were able to do a course in 15 minutes and it wasn't tracking you and they gave you credit for an hour, then that's really not very ethical. But the point is, those are what were limited before COVID and during, and still would be limited afterwards. But you could have all of your courses online if they were ones that were trackable, basically keeping track that you are actively engaged in the actual presentation.
Okay. So we've got a couple others that have come in. If an engineer is let go for refusing to do something they consider unethical, is that considered wrongful termination?
That would actually be probably a court issue. So that is, the employment law ends up going in a different direction than what we would have. So I would say that would have to be pursued in a court.
Okay. And then when an engineer at a public entity hires a consultant to prepare the design, but then the public entity administers the construction contract, are there any issues with the public entity's in-house engineer preparing change orders that involve modifications to the design using his or her own registration?
Well, good question. So one is, I guess to start off with, is the consultant or the engineer was hired to create something for that entity. They did that, they prepared it. Normally, if that, this is just me looking at it, but if that happened and something needed to get modified, we normally would go to the original engineer and say, hey, this looks like we need to have this changed, and go that way. If you modify it, you're basically then the one taking on, without going back to the engineer, then you're kind of taking on that responsibility of that total change order and the whether it's going to function correctly. Again, we've had cases where structurally something didn't look right, or there's a field change that just needed to get occurred. We would go back to the original engineer and say, hey, this is a field change. Does your design still work? We think it does, but we want to hear from you. So I think that's a relationship you got to have. You just make sure that you're, and I would never want to supersede what I paid somebody to design without their input.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Okay, well,
yeah.
Again, hopefully I've given you enough information. I know you said you're going to, post this, that people can look at the addresses, the websites, the email contacts, and be able to get any questions they have answered for that. Some of them are, probably specific, and others might be more general related, but I think that you'll find that both entities are very helpful.
Well, thank you very much, Dean, on behalf of the Central Ohio section for presenting today. We really do appreciate it. To everyone attending, thank you for attending, and be on the lookout for the the April luncheon announcement coming out shortly. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.